Why did she stand up when everyone else was scrambling for cover? The valley exploded in fire and dust. A rocket-propelled grenade screamed overhead, striking the rock face with a thunderclap that sent shards of stone flying. Men cursed, scrambled, bled. The air was filled with the metallic bite of gunfire, the raw sound of survival. And yet, one figure rose, calm, deliberate, as though chaos itself bent around her. Morgan Haye, call sign Phoenix. Captain James Miller had seen operators break under far less pressure. 23 years in Delta had taught him the sound of panic, the desperate staccato of men trying to stay alive. But when Morgan stood, Miller felt the tempo shift. She didn't belong to the panic. She belonged to the storm. "Hayes, get down." Miller's voice cut sharp over comms, but she didn't flinch. Her auburn hair, tucked beneath her cap, had long since gathered dust. Her sleeves were torn, revealing the lattice of scars that even now caught Miller's eye. Burns, cuts, wounds that didn't heal smooth but rough, like terrain scarred by war. And still, her hands moved with precision, assembling the Javelin missile system like a machine built only for this moment. Why did she ignore his order? Why did she carry herself like someone who had already died once and refused to bow again? Bullets snapped into dirt at her feet. A tank's turret groaned as it swung toward their position. If the gun fired, none of them would leave that valley alive. Miller knew it. Every man on his team knew it. And yet the one who stepped forward wasn't their heavy weapons specialist or himself, but Phoenix. She hoisted the launcher onto her shoulder with a fluidity that seemed unreal, as if the 26-pound weapon was only a feather in her hands. Dust swirled around her boots. The sky split with tracers, and then her voice, calm, unnervingly calm, carried across the comms. "Fire in the hole." The Javelin roared, streaking upward before diving down like judgment itself. For a second, silence clung to the valley. Then the tank vanished in a fireball that rocked the ground beneath them, sending its turret spinning skyward in a grotesque ballet of steel and smoke. She didn't stop. She dropped the launcher, rolled into position, and with chilling steadiness began returning fire with her rifle. One shot, one kill. Each trigger squeeze was metronomic, like she'd rehearsed the rhythm in her bones. Miller's men rallied behind the sudden shift. They fought with renewed clarity, as if her defiance alone gave them permission to believe they might survive. 7 minutes later, the valley was silent again. The insurgents melted away, leaving their dead in the dust. Miller lowered his weapon, chest heaving. His ears rang. His men groaned as wounds were bound, as blood stained the rocks. And then he saw her, Phoenix, already kneeling beside the injured, hands steady, eyes sharp, voice calm, as though she hadn't just pulled them back from the brink of annihilation. He walked to her, his boots crunching through the gravel. "Where did you learn to fire a javelin like that?" She looked up, green eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, Miller swore he saw something in them, an old pain, raw and unhealed, older than any of their wars. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask of a professional. "I had good teachers," she said simply. Later, as the medevac rotors thundered above, Miller overheard one of his men whisper, "Holy SHT, Wonder Woman." She lifted that thing like it was nothing. Scars all over her arms, and she saved every damn one of us. Miller didn't reply. He only watched her hands cleaning blood that wasn't hers. Something inside him knew the story of Phoenix wasn't written in any personnel file, and it wasn't over. Years passed, the war ended, but scars didn't vanish with treaties. A bell jingled in a quiet Montana gun shop. Snow swirled outside, drifting against the mountains. Sheriff James Miller, older now, hair silver, skin weathered by years, stomped his boots and closed the door behind him. The scent of gun, oil, and leather filled the air. Behind the counter, bent over a rifle under magnifying lenses, was Phoenix, Morgan Haye. Her auburn hair was streaked with silver now, her face lined but her presence undiminished. She didn't look up. "Morning, Sheriff," she said, Coffee's fresh." Miller poured himself a cup. The warmth filled his hands, though not the quiet unease he always carried when he saw her scars peek out from beneath her sleeves. Most townsfolk only knew her as the reclusive gunsmith. Efficient, skilled, never one for small talk, but Miller knew more. Enough to recognize the way her shop was built like a fortress. Enough to see the way she always sat with her back to the wall. Enough to sense that Phoenix had never stopped living like the enemy was one step behind. "Got those custom loads you wanted," she said, sliding a small box across the counter. 50 feet per second faster, don't miss." Miller smiled faintly. "Still the best work I've ever seen." Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Flattery doesn't get you a discount." The door opened again. Frank Henderson entered, cane tapping the floor. 73 years old but sharp-eyed. The kind of man who wore his past like a shadow. Miller knew him too, a Cold War spook whose history never made it into textbooks. "Storm's coming," Henderson said, hanging up his coat. They exchanged looks. Storm didn't mean weather, not for them. Morgan quietly flipped the sign to closed, pulled the blinds, and opened a concealed laptop. On the screen, photographs, dead operatives, accidents that weren't accidents, robberies that weren't robberies. 3 more last week," she said, her voice even. "Agency, Delta, CIA, that makes 7 in 3 months." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken dread. Henderson leaned closer, his hand brushing the screen like he could will the names back to life. "Patterns accelerating," he said. "Who's next?" Morgan didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the faces, men and women who once belonged to something only a few knew existed. A team that once called itself Olympus. A team that had burned away the empire of one of the world's most dangerous arms dealers. Now, one by one, they were being erased. Outside, snowflakes drifted softly against the window. A black SUV rolled slowly past the shop. Government plates, blurred intentionally. Morgan's hand froze over her tools. "James," she whispered, nodding toward the glass. The sheriff shifted, casual but deliberate, warming his hands by the stove while his eyes tracked the street. Henderson's posture changed too, his cane angled just enough to free his hand. "Could be nothing," Morgan said, but none of them believed it. When Miller stepped into the back to make a secure call, Morgan unlocked a hidden box beneath her bench. Inside, passports, challenge coins, photos. She unfolded one, 7 faces, her old team, Olympus. 4 of them already marked with excess. Only 3 unmarked remained, hers among them. "Doesn't make burying friends any easier," she whispered. Henderson's eyes softened. "Olympus was the best team I ever put together. We knew the risks." Morgan folded the photo, locked it away again, and returned to her rifle. Her hands were steady. Her eyes weren't. That night, as the snow thickened outside her small house, Morgan poured a glass of bourbon and sat in her chair. Her home was unremarkable from the outside, by design. Inside, it was a fortress. Sensors hidden in garden ornaments, bulletproof glass, caches of weapons behind false panels. Her phone buzzed. Dr. Sarah Chen's name appeared, a friend, a cover for a check-in. "Still on for coffee tomorrow?" Sarah asked, words carrying the hidden code. "Yes," Morgan replied. "One more thing," Sarah added. "Man came by today asking about you. Expensive watch, Eastern European accent, said he wanted custom work done." Morgan's fingers froze around the glass. Description. Sarah gave it. Morgan didn't need the rest. She already knew. She pulled up her security feeds. The SUV, the man, the face she'd hoped never to see again. She sent the image to Miller. The reply came fast. Dmitry Volkov, former Spetsnaz, current contractor, right hand of Viktor Zakayv. Morgan's blood ran cold. Zakayv, the arms dealer they had dismantled years ago. The man who had held her captive, who carved her scars into her body, who promised vengeance before Olympus broke his empire. He had found her. Morgan's hand hovered over a satellite phone she hadn't touched in years. Dialing the number would erase everything she'd built here. It would burn her new life down to ash. But Volkov's face on that screen meant there was no choice. She pressed the line, and when the automated voice answered, she whispered 3 words. Olympus has fallen. Why did he walk through the door like he owned the place? The bell above the gun shop jingled sharp against the silence. Cold air swept in with 4 men. They wore civilian clothes, but no one with Morgan's eyes could mistake them for tourists. Their posture, their spacing, the subtle way they scanned corners, military men, trained, dangerous. The first through the door was unmistakable. Tall, broad, eyes like winter steel, Dmitry Volkov. His smile was polite, practiced, the kind that reached no further than his lips. He moved toward the counter like a man stepping onto a chessboard he believed he already controlled. His men fanned out across the room, positioning themselves in a way that looked casual to civilians, but to Morgan, every placement screamed kill zone. "Good morning," Volkov said, his Russian accent softened by years of practice. "I was told this is the place for custom ammunition." Morgan didn't flinch, didn't blink. She forced her voice steady, professional. "Depends on what you need." He studied her, not the shop, not the rifles, her, like a predator assessing prey. "My associates and I are planning a hunting expedition," he said. "We require specialized ammunition, challenging targets." The subtext landed heavy. The hunt wasn't for deer. Sheriff Miller shifted slightly by the stove, his hand never straying far from his sidearm. Henderson, cane resting against the wall, appeared relaxed, but Morgan knew better. His hand hovered near the Colt .45 he carried as faithfully as his own heartbeat. Morgan moved deliberately, pulling a tray of sample rounds. Her movements betrayed nothing of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What caliber?" she asked. "7.62 by 54R, Volkov said smoothly. "For the Dragunov, a Russian classic, still my favorite." He picked up one of the rounds she set down, rolling it between his fingers. His eyes never left hers. "Sometimes," he said, "the old ways are the most reliable. Wouldn't you agree, Miss Haye?" Her name, struck like a blade. She hadn't given it to him. He wanted her to know he already knew. Her reply was ice. "Reliability comes from discipline, not age." A flicker of amusement touched his lips. Wise words. How many rounds will it take to prove them true? "Custom loads take time," she said flatly. "We are patient men," Volkov answered, smiling wider now. "Very patient. Some would say stubborn. When we start something, we always finish it." He set a business card on the counter, its number untraceable at first glance. "Call when the ammunition is ready. We'll be in town, for as long as it takes." He turned, but not before pausing by a framed photograph on the wall, one Morgan had taken herself. Montana's snow-draped mountains under a pale sky. "Beautiful country," Volkov mused. "Reminds me of certain valleys in Syria." The room went still. He didn't need to say more. He didn't need to see the scars hidden beneath her sleeves. He already knew. And then he left. The bell jingled again. The cold air closed behind them. Silence swallowed the room. Miller's jaw tightened. He might as well have told us outright, "He's here to kill you." Morgan walked to the window, staring at the SUV as it pulled away. Her voice was low, steady. "This isn't just about me. It's about Olympus. He's tying off every loose end." Henderson's cane clicked as he moved beside her. "Then we don't wait for him to finish the job. We move first." That night Morgan sat alone at her workbench. The hum of the lamp overhead cast shadows across her tools, across the lines of her face, across the scars hidden beneath fabric. Her hands moved, steady as always, cleaning a rifle. But her mind wasn't here. It was back in Syria. The smell of damp concrete, the sting of restraints biting into raw flesh, the echo of footsteps before the door opened. And then the woman, Elena Orlova, Zakayv's specialist. Her voice had been calm, clinical as she turned pain into art. Morgan could still feel the heat of the iron, the calculated slice of the blade, the careful balance between agony and survival. 6 days of hell. 6 days that carved Phoenix into her. Her hand trembled once, then stilled. She forced herself to keep working. Weapons didn't clean themselves. Weakness didn't keep you alive. A knock at the back door broke the silence. Miller entered, snow dusting his shoulders. His face was grave. "Confirmation," he said. 3 vehicles entered town last night. 7 men. Checked in at the Mountain View Motel. Hunting party on paper." In February, Henderson's dry voice followed as he stepped in behind him. Miller shook his head. "Rentals out of Billings, paid in cash. They're here for us." Morgan didn't argue. She only unlocked a drawer beneath the bench, revealing the hidden floor safe. From it, she pulled a folded satellite map of Silverwood and the surrounding mountains, annotated with marks only they understood. "They'll establish posts here, here, and here," she said, tapping the map. "Standard Spetsnaz reconnaissance protocol. They'll confirm me as the target first. Then they'll move. Volkov won't commit until he's sure." "And when he is?" Miller asked. Morgan's voice was flat. "Then Zakayv comes." The name hung in the air like a curse. Viktor Zakayv, the man whose empire they had burned, the man who had ordered her broken, the man who promised revenge. For years he had been a shadow, a rumor whispered through intelligence channels. Now he was on her doorstep. "We need time," Henderson said. "Time to disappear, time to—" Morgan cut him off. "No, I've been running for 7 years. I'm not running again." She reached for another locked cabinet. The code beeped, the door swung open. Inside, weapons gleamed under fluorescent light. Not civilian firearms, not hunting rifles. Weapons meant for war. At the back, resting in a transport case, was the Javelin. Miller whistled under his breath. "You've been keeping secrets." "Contingencies," she said simply, running her hand over the case. Her eyes lifted, steady, unflinching. "This was how I survived Syria, and it's how we'll survive Montana." Hours later, Morgan walked home under falling snow. The streets were quiet. Houses glowed warm with light. Families gathered around dinner tables. Couples watched television. Children played in the living room. She envied them. Her house looked ordinary from the outside. A single-story ranch, white paint, detached garage, but beneath its quiet shell it was a fortress. Reinforced walls, bulletproof windows, escape tunnels leading into the forest. She had built it with one truth in mind. Someday someone would come. She stepped inside, locked the door, ran her checks. Motion sensors, cameras, traps. Only when the perimeter was secure did she allow herself to sit. She poured a finger of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. She stared at it, at the glass, at her reflection in the liquid. The woman who looked back was not the gunsmith of Silverwood, not Morgan Haye. She was Phoenix, and Phoenix knew war was coming. The phone rang. "Secure line," she answered. "Coffee tomorrow," Sarah Chen's voice, casual. "Yes," Morgan replied. "Good. Oh, and one more thing. A man was asking about you today. Mid-40s, designer watch, accent Eastern European." Morgan's grip tightened on the phone. "He said he wanted custom work. Asked how long you'd been in Silverwood." Morgan closed her eyes. Volkov was already circling, already probing her defenses. "Thanks, Sarah," she said quietly. When the call ended, Morgan went straight to her surveillance feed. The black SUV appeared again. Different angle, parked longer, watching. Volkov wasn't just looking for her, he was baiting her, testing her. And when she zoomed the frame and saw him standing outside the hotel, cigarette in hand, his eyes scanning her shop from across the street, she knew one thing with certainty. The storm wasn't coming. The storm was here. Why were the lights in her shop flickering when the power grid was stable? Morgan knew the answer before the thought finished. They were testing her, probing for weaknesses. It was never about the electricity. It was about control. From her upstairs window she scanned the street. Snow whispered against glass. The SUV sat parked 2 blocks down, its headlights off, its frame hulking like a predator crouched in the shadows. She couldn't see the men inside, but she didn't need to. She felt them. Sheriff Miller had warned her earlier that day. 3 more unfamiliar vehicles registered at the motel. A group that called themselves hunters, but carried themselves like wolves. The town didn't know. Families were stringing up Christmas lights. Kids were sliding on frozen streets. Couples walked hand in hand beneath falling snow. Silverwood was a town that respected silence, that never asked questions about past lives. That silence had sheltered her for years. Now it threatened to kill them all. Her comm unit buzzed, Henderson's voice low and steady. "They've established 3 posts, North Ridge gas station and your street." Morgan's hand brushed the pistol at her side. "They're building a cage." "Exactly, waiting for confirmation." Confirmation meant her, Phoenix, Zakayv's ghost, the woman who refused to die in Syria. She pulled on her coat, slid her rifle into its case and stepped out into the snow. The night was silent, but she felt the eyes on her, patient, calculating, waiting. She walked 3 blocks to Miller's office. He opened the door without a word. Inside, the stove crackled. The sheriff poured coffee, the ritual anchoring them in something that still resembled normal life. "They're not moving tonight," Miller said. "Too much snow, too many eyes in town. They'll wait for the right moment." "And when they move," Morgan replied, "they'll make it clean, quiet. Silverwood will never even know." Miller nodded. "Unless we act first." The first strike came not with gunfire, but with a knock. Sarah Chen, the doctor, the only civilian who knew the truth about Morgan's scars. She stood in the doorway of Morgan's shop, face pale, breath steaming in the winter air. "There was a man," Sarah said. "Came into the clinic this morning, said he had a cut, but he asked too many questions about you." Morgan's blood chilled. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, I sent him away, but Morgan, he wasn't sick. He was watching me, watching the clinic." That was the moment Morgan knew. The storm wasn't content to circle. It was moving, and it was moving on anyone who touched her. At 200, her cameras caught movement. 4 men, black-clad, moving with the precision of professionals. They weren't approaching her house. They were moving on Sarah's. Morgan's voice cut sharp over comms. "They're targeting Chen." Miller's reply was immediate. "I'm en route." Morgan was already moving, boots crunching through snow as she cut across backyards. Her rifle case bounced lightly against her back, a familiar weight. She reached the tree line behind Sarah's small house. Through her scope she saw them. 4 operators, 1 at the front door, 2 at the sides, 1 at the rear. Standard breach formation. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat steadied. The snowstorm masked her. She had seconds. She squeezed the trigger. The team leader dropped, skull snapped back by a round that cut clean and final. Before his body hit the snow, she shifted, second target. Another round, another fall. The remaining 2 reacted instantly, disciplined. 1 dropped behind the garden wall, returning suppressive fire. The other flanked, moving through the snow with lethal precision. 2 tangos reacting professionally, Morgan murmured. 1 flanking east to west, 1 fixed. "Copy," Miller's voice came back. He was already moving. Morgan adjusted her scope. The man behind the wall shifted just enough. She took the shot. Center mass. Armor didn't matter. The impact folded him. Silence broken only by the crackle of gunfire in the trees. Then Miller's voice. Clear. Flanker neutralized. Morgan exhaled, rising from her position. "Sarah." They breached the back door. Inside, the house bore scars of forced entry, but Sarah was alive, disheveled, shaken, shotgun in her hands, barrel still warm. "Morgan," she gasped, lowering it. "What the hell is happening?" No time for explanations, no time for truth. Miller's voice cut from the front. Convoy approaching. Morgan glanced through the window, headlights carved through the storm. The SUV, reinforcements. She grabbed Sarah's arm. They're here to kill you because of me. We need to move, now. To Sarah's credit, she didn't argue. She grabbed her medical bag, followed without hesitation. The three of them slipped through the rear, vanishing into the tree line just as the vehicle skidded to a stop. Men poured out, weapons drawn, scanning the night. Morgan raised her rifle, crosshairs settling on the man who emerged from the lead vehicle. Victor Zakayv. Even across distance and storm, she knew him. Older, silver streaking his hair, but unmistakable. The same cold gaze, the same arrogance in his stride. She centered the crosshairs on his chest. Her finger tightened. One shot could end it, end him, end all of this. But the image of Silverwood flashed in her mind. Families, children, neighbors who never asked about her past. If she killed him here, his men would burn the town to ash. So she shifted. 1 inch, one round, shattered the glass of his SUV inches from his head. Not a kill, a message. Through her scope, she saw his lips move. Words she couldn't hear but read clearly enough. "Hello, Phoenix, I've been waiting." Morgan lowered her rifle, turned, disappeared into the storm with Miller and Sarah at her side. They regrouped in Henderson's hidden bunker before dawn. The old man was already waiting, systems lit, satellite feeds glowing. Miller laid it out. "They've confirmed her identity. Zakayv himself is here. That means it's already escalated." Sarah sat wrapped in a blanket, eyes wide but steady. She wasn't a civilian anymore, not after tonight. Morgan rolled up her sleeve, revealing the scars to her. "This is why he's here, because I survived what he meant to finish, because Olympus destroyed his empire. Now he wants it all back, and he'll kill anyone who ever stood in his way." Sarah didn't flinch at the scars. She nodded once. "Then we stop him." Morgan studied her. A doctor, civilian, innocent once. But after tonight, innocence was gone. "From this moment," Morgan said quietly, "we burn it all. No more running, Phoenix Protocol." Henderson's hand hovered over the comms. His old eyes flickered with something between pride and sorrow. "Understood. Phoenix Protocol initiated." Miller looked at Morgan. "That means war." Morgan's eyes were steady. "No, it means survival, and survival isn't clean." Outside, the storm swallowed Silverwood. Inside the bunker, silence stretched long before Henderson's voice broke it. "God help them," he murmured, "because we won't." That night Morgan lay awake in the bunker. The others slept. She couldn't. Her mind replayed Zakayv's face, the cold recognition in his eyes, the mocking calm in his words. "Hello, Phoenix." She rolled back her sleeve, tracing the scars carved into her arm. Each one told a story of a day she should have died but didn't. Damascus had tried to end her. Syria had tried to break her. Zakayv had promised to erase her. And yet she still breathed. Scars weren't weakness. They were proof. Proof that she had endured. Proof that when he came again, and he would, she would endure once more. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't warn. It doesn't beg. Sometimes dignity simply waits. And acts. Why did she choose to hunt in the deep dark when every sensible map pointed to retreat? They called it a morgue for mistakes. The old hunting lodge 5 miles north, a stone skeleton half swallowed by the pines, a place where lights went out and men didn't come back the same. For Zakayv it was a safe house. For Morgan it was a wound that still bled. Tonight it was a target. The bunker smelled of diesel and stale coffee. Monitors painted the concrete walls with thermal ghosts. Henderson's fingers moved over a keyboard like a man coaxing music from a broken piano, old hands making new noise. Miller checked rifles with the steady, patient motions of a man who had to believe his checks would hold lives together. Dr. Sarah Chen folded and refolded gauze with the tiny, compulsive care of someone who mended flesh for a living. her hands a promise that the wounded might live. Morgan sat between them, a silent center. She had told them she wasn't going to run. Saying it wasn't the same as meaning it, and meaning it was heavier than any rifle. Her jaw set like old leather. Inside, memories turned like razors. She remembered the first night in Damascus, the hiss of a lighter, the smug faces leaning in to watch a woman break. She remembered the sound of her own voice when she'd told herself to stay, to bite on survival like hunger. She remembered being found, nearly dead, and how Olympus had burned his supply lines so that one day she could walk free. Now Zakayv had returned, and the ledger demanded payment. "Satellite confirms a forward operating base at the lodge," Henderson said, voice clipped. "Thermals show 20 bodies, maybe more. Zakayv with them. Volkov too." Miller pinched the bridge of his nose. "And Ghost." Morgan's eyes looked older than her face. "Walker was in their custody last observed near Billings. If he's here, he's our priority." Silence gathered, not holy but necessary. The plan had to be bloodless on paper and deadly in practice. It had to move like a machine with no loose bolts. It had to account for weather, for terrain, and for the human variables that always frayed neat strategies. She laid out the map on the table. Her gloved finger traced the contours of the lodge, the ridges, the frozen creek that cut like a throat between them and their objective. "Phase 1. Henderson creates a diversion at the substation southeast," she said. "Power goes out, they flip to generators. They fix the lights, they move to secure the obvious. Phase 2. Miller and Sarah go in through the old mining tunnel, clean and unobserved. Reach the north entrance, bypass the perimeter. Phase 3. I establish overwatch on the southwest ridge, take out perimeter teams simultaneously when Henderson hits the diversion. Pull Ghost. Exit via tunnel. Sarah provides immediate triage on site. We spike the route behind us. Delay their pursuit." Henderson nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the map. "Sound. The satellite window gives us a narrow gap, 20 minutes after the diversion before they can reorient. That's our window." "Who's watching our back?" Miller asked. "Zakayv's not a one-man show. He has assets inside channels." Henderson gave a flat laugh that tasted like rust. "We have old friends, off-books people who still carry favors in their teeth. Air cover is optimistic, but we can get eyes on the field through a friendly asset. No agencies, no signatures." They assembled like conspirators. Miller and a trusted deputy disguised as maintenance workers, fitted with comms and the patience of men who could crouch in cold dirt for hours. Sarah, instructed in basics beyond triage, how to hold a weapon, where to aim if she had to, swallowed the last of her civilian certainty and became something else, a promise with a stethoscope. Henderson fed encrypted channels, opened hidden lines to phantom contacts who would, at the right second, whistle through the dark with data. Morgan tuned the FGM's optics, adjusted the Javelin case like a veneration of a terrible god she hoped not to invoke. As dusk bled into a thicker night, they moved. The snow chewed at boots, heavy and patient, swallowing prints almost as soon as they were made. That was an ally, whether that muffled sound, blurred thermal signatures, softened the world's edges. It was also a betrayer, making every movement cost more. Morgan took the longer approach, the ridgeline that gave an unforgiving view. Her breath came in a white cadence, a metronome for the tension coiled under her ribs. Old muscles remembered angles and envelopes, how to fold a body into a shadow until it seemed to be part of the mountain. She set up a firing platform, smoothed snow, leveled her scope. Her hands worked like the hands of a surgeon, precise, patient, efficient. Down below, the lodge exhaled light and activity. Figures moved with purpose. Zakayv's men had vehicles lined and weapons stacked. She watched a small group congregate under a light pole, perimeter, the obvious meat of their defense. She marked 4 positions she could reach with a suppressed rifle and 1 with a javelin should a vehicle present itself. Her throat was dry. Her mind ran the same calculus she'd run in years past. Kill vectors, collateral, moral cost. She let herself feel something like anger, thin, steady, not the flaring kind that betrayed a shooter, anger that sharpened rather than dulled. In the scope, faces were mere shapes. In the head, the names came back. Names of people they had lost when Olympus had burned that empire. Names that had no voice now but the weight of grief. Anger was not to be indulged. It was to be paid in action. At 2000 hours, Henderson initiated the diversion. The substation 30 miles away hiccuped, a cascade of clicks and fail-safes that mimicked the random. Lights stuttered, then fell. Generators kicked. Floodlights at the lodge snapped on. In the chaos, security protocols triggered temporary blinders for their own eyes. The defenders reoriented to the obvious threat. Morgan felt the window as a pressure change in the air. She moved. Her shots came soft, a whisper. 2 perimeter men went down like props in a play. No screams, just thuds, precision. The howl of the storm swallowed the tiny sounds. At the same time, charges set in hidden locations detonated, small, careful, creating localized chaos that redirected attention where Morgan wanted. The result was a corridor of confusion through which Miller and his deputy slid like water through a crack. Sarah followed, a medical kit like armor. They were inside before the defenders could triangulate. Miller's voice in Morgan's ear was a thread of calm. North corridor clear, tunnel exit secure, ghost is here bound, fragile. Her heart tightened, then steadied. Prep for extraction, she said. Sarah, get ready. Through the line, muffled by snow and electronics, Morgan could hear the distant sounds of men shouting and vehicles shifting. Zakayv's men were competent, they adapted quickly. But even competence had an Achilles heel, the unexpected. Morgan turned her optic to an access road where a crate had been unloaded. It was a vehicle's worth of armor. Javelin possible. She called it in. Henderson, listening through a different channel, confirmed an opening in satellite windows that would let a single firer see the vehicle cleanly for a lock. The Javelin's charge sang through the night in a way that felt obscene, beautiful in mechanics, terrible in consequence. The vehicle disintegrated in a blossom of fire. The explosion painted the snow orange and black. Crawling heat and debris threw men to the ground. Disorientation became a tool. Miller emerged with Walker slouched against him, hollow-eyed and fragile like a man who had been unstitched and then taped back together. Sarah moved like a whisper, a hand here, a bandage there, eyes that read signs of shock before they showed. Walker's name was a ghost that Morgan had carried in her mouth like a prayer, and now it came out ragged and alive. They moved into the tunnels with Walker slung between them. The plan hit friction. A guard post on the lodge's eastern flank rotated too fast, a human variable. Gunshots cracked. The team stalled, response times crescendoed as Zakayv's men reconstituted themselves. Morgan's line tightened with Miller's voice knifing orders into the dark. They pressed through a choke point, then another. Morgan fired to cover, a steady stream of suppressive fire that pinned heads down while Miller and Sarah pushed the extraction forward. Each round was a sentence. Each sentence had consequences that would not be erased by memory. At one point, a silhouette moved into her periphery. A woman, a soldier, a face Morgan recognized with a coldness that made her knees want to bend. Elena Orlova. She had come. The air grew heavy as 2 predators acknowledged each other. Orlova's posture spoke of a cruel expertise, pain honed to an instrument. Morgan's hands did not tremble, but the world narrowed to the sight of the woman whose fingers had once held her life between calculated breaks. For a heartbeat, Morgan felt the old panic rise like a tide onto a beach. Then it rolled back. She steadied her breath. This was not Damascus. This was winter. This was calculated. Orlova moved like a shadow, lethal and sure. She yelled something that rattled down the hillside, Russian syllables wrapped in contempt, and then she dove for cover behind a slab. Morgan found her and squeezed. The shot landed clean. Orlova folded, not yet dead but out of the fight. The rhythm of the mission swallowed the moment. There was no revenge to be had here. There was only the mission. By the time they reached the northern tree line, the lodge was a smear of orange and smoke. The puzzle pieces had shifted, and Zakayv's control thread unraveled into chaos. Morgan watched them move, small and human in the half-light, and felt something like a hollow satisfaction. They had done what they set out to do. They had taken a first bite out of Zakayv's plan. Back in the bunker, Sarah stitched and cleaned and demanded more morphine like someone bargaining with pain itself. Walker coughed and tried to tell them broken scraps of names, accounts, drop points, a scheduled meeting at an airfield in 48 hours. The information was brittle but precious. Zakayv's operation was bigger than anyone had guessed. The sale would be to someone of serious interest. The world could tilt on that exchange. Henderson's face was grave. "We've bought time," he said, "but we've also announced to the world that Olympus can still bite." Miller's hand came down on the map with a soft thud. "They'll regroup. They'll move faster now. We need to be ready." Morgan felt the pressure of all their eyes. She unshouldered the rifle, setting it down as if laying a cross. The night had been a crucible. Men had died. Flames had eaten what she had once called home. Walker would live, but with ghosts in his bones. They had won an engagement, not a war. There was quiet between them that was neither peace nor satisfaction, only the space where consequences gathered. Morgan understood then, with a clarity that felt like cold iron, that her life, the life she had tried to live, was finished. There would be no returning to a small-town routine, no more mornings bending over barrels under the forgiving light of a shop. The merger of her two lives had been violent and irrevocable. She thought of Olympus, the men and women whose faces were in that photograph, some dead, some missing, some still breathing. She thought of the scars and how each one had been a ledger line in a life that was always owed to someone. She thought of Zakayv watching the flames with a face like a wound, thinking himself patient. Morgan looked at them, Miller, Henderson, Sarah, three small points of light in her dark life. "We keep moving," she said, voice small but steady. "We find who still breathes and we stop them from selling everything we bled for." Henderson chuckled, the sound more brittle than comforting. "Phoenix doesn't have an option." Outside, the wind picked up and the night closed its fist. Inside, a map glowed, a list of names scrolled on a terminal, and three people made plans that would ask everything of them. There would be more fire. There would be more loss. But there would also be witness, proof that sometimes the thing that scars you becomes the thing that saves you. And Morgan, scarred, tired, fierce, felt the old resolve settle like cold metal into her bones. The hunt had become reciprocation. The ledger would be balanced, one way or another. Why was Walker whispering names, when his lungs barely had the strength to draw air? The bunker smelled of iodine, blood, and diesel. Sarah Chen's hands worked with frantic grace, stitching, pressing, whispering quiet encouragement that Morgan could tell was meant as much for herself as for the man bleeding beneath her. Walker's body was a ruin, shoulder shattered, ribs splintered, skin mottled with burns. But his eyes, sunken and fevered, still glowed with something raw. He gripped Morgan's wrist with surprising force, pulling her close. "Dubai," he rasped. "Airfield 48 hours, buyers not local, state level." His voice broke into coughs, each one stabbing through the bunker like gunfire. Sarah steadied him, but his hand refused to let go of Morgan. You know what he's selling," he forced out. Morgan's stomach turned cold, she knew, even before the words came. "Nuclear triggers." The air went still. Even the hum of Henderson's equipment seemed to falter. Miller swore softly under his breath. Sarah froze mid-motion, her eyes wide, as if the scale of what was unfolding had just stepped out of shadow. Walker's grip loosened. He slumped back unconscious, chest rising shallowly under Sarah's trembling hands. Morgan sat back, her pulse pounding. Nuclear triggers, not weapons themselves, yet, but the linchpin that made the impossible possible. Zakayv wasn't just cashing in vengeance. He was bargaining with Armageddon. The hours that followed were heavy. measured by Sarah's muttered medical instructions and Henderson's clipped updates from encrypted channels. The world outside the bunker was still wrapped in snow, still whispering with the ordinary rhythms of a Montana town. But down here, under the cold concrete, history bent. Miller broke the silence. "We've got one shot, hit the airfield before the transfer, no second chances." "And no backup," Henderson added. "Agencies are compromised. Zakayv has friends in every room that matters. If we raise alarms, he'll scatter, disappear, and we'll never find him again." Sarah looked up from Walker, her face pale but resolute. "So it's just us." Morgan didn't answer immediately. Her mind moved backward before forward. She remembered the long nights in Damascus when pain was both constant and calculated, when survival meant thinking beyond the moment, past the agony, into a place where the mind was already free, already somewhere else. She had lived then by imagining a future she might never see. Now the future was here, and it was darker than anything she had imagined. She stood, her voice low, steady. "We move, no hesitation. Zakayv wants Olympus erased, fine. We'll show him what Olympus really was." They prepared in silence, each person moving like gears in an old, trusted clock. Miller checked weapons. Henderson mapped exit routes with the precision of a cartographer who drew in blood. Sarah packed her med kit with trembling hands, but not a single item was forgotten. Morgan opened the locked case at the back of the bunker. Inside lay the weapon she swore she'd only ever use again if the world demanded it. An M110 sniper system. Her old rifle. The one she had carried through battles that now lived only as scars. She touched it with reverence and fear. Memories came unbidden. The recoil, the scent of cordite, the whispered breath before a kill shot. It was part of her and she hated it for that. Miller noticed. "You don't have to carry that weight again." She shook her head. "I never put it down." The airfield lay 60 miles east, carved out of empty prairie where wind screamed across frozen earth. On satellite images it looked abandoned, an old Cold War relic, its runways cracked, its hangars rusted. But at night Henderson showed them, it lit up with new veins. Cargo planes, trucks, guards with discipline that spoke of something more than mercenaries. Zakayv had chosen well, remote, forgettable, easy to bury secrets in. The night of the approach, the team moved in 2 vehicles, headlights off, crawling across frozen backroads that cracked under tires. Every bump rattled Sarah's nerves, though she tried to hide it. Miller's hand never strayed far from his rifle. Henderson muttered coordinates like a prayer. Morgan drove. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead, but inside, questions gnawed. How many lives had she chosen for sacrifice by standing her ground? How many civilians in Silverwood would pay if Zakayv retaliated after tonight? How many Olympus ghosts were watching, waiting to see if she would falter? She remembered something her father once said when she was a girl, sitting in the dark after her first nightmare about war. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Morgan. It's the decision to keep moving while it's screaming in your ear." The fear screamed now, and still she drove. They reached the perimeter at 200. The prairie was black ice under a waning moon, the air so sharp it stung lungs. Through night vision, the world glowed in green specters. Guard patrols moved in predictable loops, but there were too many to sneak past unnoticed. Morgan positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the main hangar. Miller and Sarah would breach through a drainage tunnel identified on old schematics. Henderson would coordinate from the vehicle, antenna masked to avoid detection. The plan was simple. Plans always were until they were. Morgan's breath fogged against the scope. She tracked patrols, whispering positions to Miller. Her finger rested against the trigger, steady, patient. Then the first break. A guard shifted out of pattern, heading straight toward the drainage tunnel. Miller and Sarah froze in shadow. One wrong move, one stray sound, and the mission would be ash before it began. Morgan exhaled, squeezed. The guard crumpled, snow drinking his blood without a sound. Path clear, she whispered. Miller's voice came back low. Copy, moving. Inside the hangar, Miller's bodycam fed Henderson's monitor in grainy green light. Crates stacked high, armed men packing, and at the center, a steel container flanked by Volkov and 2 lieutenants. Morgan's gut tightened. That container held the triggers. She knew it as surely as she knew her own scars. Then she saw him, Zakayv, calm, composed, hands folded behind his back like a man watching a rehearsal he had orchestrated 1,000 times. His presence filled the hangar without a word. Miller whispered, visual on package, Zakayv in command. Morgan's finger twitched against the trigger. She had the angle. She could end him here now. But too many guards, too much risk. A shot now would kill him, or it would burn them all before they touched the container. She forced herself to wait, to watch. And then the buyers arrived. 3 men in suits, faces hidden behind scarves against the cold. Their accents betrayed them when they spoke, faint but sharp. Mandarin. Henderson swore softly in her ear. State-level confirmation. China. If that transfer completes, we're too late. Morgan's blood turned to ice. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't even black market greed. This was geopolitics, a lever that could tilt nations. She whispered into comms, "We can't let that plane leave the ground." Miller's reply was grim, "Then we don't." The firefight erupted not with Morgan's shot, but with Sarah's hand slipping against cold metal, a clang that echoed like a bell through the hangar. Shouts, weapons raised, Volkov barking orders, Zakayv turning his head, his eyes narrowing as if he already knew exactly who was here. Miller opened fire first, precise bursts that dropped 2 guards before they could react. Chaos unfolded like a storm. Sarah dragged the container's latch open, screaming over the noise, "I've got it." Morgan's rifle cracked from the ridge, each shot finding a target, buying seconds they didn't have. Henderson's voice filled their ears with angles, exits, countdowns. Volkov roared like an animal, his Dragunov thundering as he hunted for her. Bullets tore earth inches from her cheek. And then Zakayv stepped into her scope, calm, unhurried. He raised his hand, signaling his men. He looked directly into the lens as if the scope was an eye, as if he could see her there, breathless and broken between snow and steel. His lips formed the words again. "Hello, Phoenix." Morgan's hand trembled. For the first time in years, her hand trembled. She blinked hard, forced the sight steady. But before she could fire, Volkov tackled Zakayv down behind cover, dragging him out of sight. The shot missed its chance. The hangar burned behind them. Explosives set by Henderson reduced the triggers to twisted fragments. Miller and Sarah staggered back through the tunnel, dragging injuries and stolen minutes. Morgan covered the retreat, her shots buying their way into the night. By dawn they were gone, alive, the triggers destroyed, but Zakayv alive too, watching, waiting. In the bunker, as Sarah bandaged Miller's arm and Henderson cataloged Walker's broken intel, Morgan sat alone. The rifle leaned against the wall. Her hands shook quietly in her lap. She had pulled the trigger hundreds of times in her life. But tonight her hesitation had spared him, and that hesitation haunted her more than any scar. For the first time since Syria, she asked herself the question she hated most. Am I still who I was? Or did they break me and I've just been pretending all these years? The silence didn't answer. Why were the Christmas lights still glowing in Silverwood when death was already on its way? The town looked unchanged, quiet streets, smoke curling from chimneys, children laughing in boots too big for their feet. Life went on as if no one had seen the shadows crawling at its edge. But Morgan saw. Every flicker of light felt like a target painted against the dark. Every laugh sounded like a countdown. Zakayv had shifted. She could feel it in her bones. The failed airfield exchange hadn't broken him. It had enraged him. She'd seen it before. Men like him turned setbacks into vengeance, not retreat. And when vengeance came, it didn't aim for soldiers. It aimed for the soft places. Silverwood was soft. Miller slammed his fist against the table in the bunker, the sound echoing against concrete. We can't defend the whole damn town. We don't have the manpower, and Zakayv knows it. Henderson leaned back in his chair, eyes hard under the glow of the monitors. He won't come with columns of men. He'll come surgical, sabotage, disruption, make it look like accidents until the town loses faith in its sheriff and its ghosts. Sarah looked between them, her face pale, her hands still raw from stitching Miller's wounds. Then, what happens when people start dying? What happens when children don't wake up in the morning because their water was poisoned, or when gas lines mysteriously explode? Silence hung heavy. Sarah had spoken what they all feared. Morgan finally broke it. Her voice was low, deliberate. Then we stop waiting. Miller turned. You're talking offense. She nodded. Zakayv knows me. He knows I won't let civilians pay my price. He's counting on that. So we give him something else to think about. We strike him before he strikes here. Henderson raised a brow. You suggesting we bait him? Morgan's eyes were flint. No, I'm suggesting we burn the ground before he can plant his flag. 2 nights later, the first spark came. Silverwood's gas station erupted at 3 a.m. A fireball that lit the snow orange, shaking windows for blocks. No casualties by luck alone. But when Miller pulled surveillance footage, it showed exactly what they expected. 2 men, military build, planting charges before vanishing into the night. Zakayv was probing, softening the ground. Morgan stood at the scene as dawn bled gray into the smoke. Townsfolk gathered in stunned silence, staring at the ruin, whispering names, questions. She caught fragments. Was it the tanks? Accident? No, no accident. Look at the cuts. She felt their eyes slide to her. The gunsmith, the outsider, the scarred woman who had lived among them without explanation. Suspicion grew like frost. Miller moved to stand beside her, his badge heavy on his chest. His presence steadied some, but not all. Morgan saw it, the shift. If Zakayv couldn't break her with bullets, he'd break her with isolation. Sarah appeared at her side, voice tight. How long before he makes it personal? Morgan didn't answer. She already knew. Too long. The personal came faster than expected. At 200 the next night, Sarah's clinic windows shattered under gunfire. She survived only because Morgan was already awake, watching feeds, intercepting the team before they could breach. Snow turned red under her rifle. 3 men didn't leave Silverwood alive. But that night Sarah looked at Morgan differently, not with fear, but with knowledge. You were right, Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. This was never going to end with me being just a doctor again. Morgan's throat tightened. She wanted to tell Sarah to walk away, to run, but lies stuck in her mouth. She couldn't protect her anymore. By morning, Henderson confirmed it. Zakayv had moved assets into the county, not just mercenaries, vehicles, supplies, enough to suggest something larger than harassment. They're staging, Henderson said grimly. A full incursion, hidden under cover of rural nothing. He's going to bleed the town until we come crawling. Miller rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched in every line. We've got 24 deputies, half of them part-time. We're not built for a war. Morgan's voice was steady, but her eyes carried weight. Then we make them believe we are. That night she walked alone through the town square. Christmas lights twinkled, music drifted faintly from the diner, but her eyes caught every shadow. She remembered walking through Syrian streets lit the same way, normalcy humming while terror moved just beyond sight. Her scars itched under her sleeves, a reminder, a warning. And then she saw it. A child's mitten dropped in the snow, pink, small. She bent, picked it up, and her chest hollowed. This was what Zakayv wanted. He wanted her looking at mittens and thinking of graves. He wanted her to believe she couldn't protect them. She clenched the mitten in her fist, hard enough that the wool cut into her skin. No, he would not have this town, not while she breathed. The attack came on the third night. Explosions ripped through Silverwood's power substation, plunging half the town into darkness. Gunfire echoed from the ridge. The sound of engines roared as trucks pushed toward the outskirts. Miller's voice cut sharp over comms. "They're hitting in 3 directions, splitting us." Morgan was already moving, rifle slung, eyes cold. "Then we split them faster." She took position on the water tower, the highest point in town. Through her scope, she saw them, teams advancing with brutal precision, firing to sow panic, not just to kill. She picked her targets methodically. 1, 2, 3. Each fell into snow without ever knowing her name. But there were too many. For every one she dropped, 2 more pressed forward. On the ground, Miller rallied deputies into defensive lines. Henderson coordinated traffic lights, forcing Zakayv's vehicles into choke points where homemade barricades slowed them. Sarah transformed the diner into a field clinic, her hands already red with blood. The town was alive with chaos, and still Morgan fought. She saw Volkov among them, calm, commanding, his Dragunov thundering from cover. He wasn't reckless. He was pulling them toward something deeper. Then her feed caught it. Not the firefight, not the chaos, something worse. A van parked near the elementary school, wires running under the snow. Her stomach dropped. "Miller," she snapped. "Explosive rigged near the school. It's not about winning the fight, it's about sending a message." She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for backup. She moved. The van sat quiet, its windows dark. Snow dusted its roof. To anyone else, it was just another abandoned vehicle. To Morgan, it screamed trap. She approached low, rifle steady. Her breath clouded, her heartbeat thudded in her ears. Through the window, she saw the wires, the timer. 3 minutes. Her hands worked fast, muscle memory clawed from old training. But the design, this wasn't crude. This was professional, a signature. Orlova's. Her chest constricted. Orlova was alive. Wounded, maybe, but alive enough to send her regards in circuitry and C4. 2 minutes. Sweat slicked her palms despite the cold. Every second was a hammer. Every cut wire was a coin flip with a town's life. 1 minute. She closed her eyes for half a breath, and then she cut. The timer froze at 7. Silence. The world didn't end. She sagged against the snow, chest heaving, as gunfire still cracked through the night. For the first time in years, her hands shook so badly she couldn't hold the rifle steady. She stared at the school, at the windows painted with paper snowflakes. She whispered to herself, voice breaking, "Not them, not here." By dawn, the assault broke. Zakayv's men withdrew, leaving blood and ruin behind. Silverwood was scarred, power gone, homes burned, bodies lined in the diner. But the school still stood. Miller walked among the wreckage, his face hollow. This is just the beginning. He's not done. Henderson's jaw was tight, his voice grave. He won't stop until Phoenix is ash, and now the whole town knows who you are. Morgan stood apart, staring at the frozen van, the wires she had cut. Her scars burned beneath her sleeves. She knew Henderson was right. Silverwood wasn't just collateral anymore. It was bait. And Zakayv had her exactly where he wanted her, tied to a place, tied to people she could abandon. Her reflection in the shattered glass looked back at her, scarred, exhausted, afraid. And still standing. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't plead. It simply refuses to fall. Why did the map on Henderson's desk feel less like paper and more like a confession? The bunker's air was heavy, metallic with blood and cordite. Sarah still worked over the wounded, townsfolk who'd never asked for this war but had bled for it anyway. Miller leaned against the wall, exhaustion weighing down his broad shoulders. Henderson tapped a satellite printout, the paper trembling slightly in old hands that rarely betrayed weakness. "This is where he goes next," Henderson said. The printout showed a warehouse complex on the Black Sea coast, cargo routes feeding through it. Satellite timestamps confirmed heavy traffic in the last 24 hours. Zakayv wasn't retreating, he was resetting. "Ships," Henderson said, voice flat. "He moves materiel from here. It's his backbone. Cut this artery, he bleeds." Miller frowned. "We barely held him off in Silverwood. Now you want us to walk into his fortress on the other side of the world." "Not want," Henderson replied. "Need. If we stay here, Silverwood dies in pieces. Zakayv will keep coming until there's nothing left but smoke." Sarah looked up, her hands still stained. "And if you go there, what if you don't come back?" No one answered, because the answer was obvious. Morgan stared at the map. Her reflection looked back at her in the glossy paper, scarred, lined, tired. She had built a quiet life here, wrapped in Montana snow and small-town silence. She had repaired rifles for hunters who never asked about the burns on her arms. She had drunk coffee in peace. For a while, she had almost believed she was just Morgan Haye. But Zakayv had torn that illusion apart. She straightened. Her voice came steady, final. "We take the fight to him. Silverwood survives only if Zakayv doesn't." Miller shook his head, almost in disbelief. "That's suicide." Morgan met his eyes. So was Syria. So was every op Olympus ever ran. Suicide is what we do until we survive. The plan unfolded not like a choice but like gravity, inevitable. Henderson reached into old networks, pulling threads long thought severed. A pilot who owed him from Bosnia. A fixer in Odessa who never burned a bridge if he could sell it twice. Shadows answered shadows. Miller gathered what weapons they could move discreetly. Sarah, against Morgan's protests, packed her med kit. "You're not coming," Morgan told her. Sarah's reply was calm but immovable. "You don't get to decide that. You need me. And if you don't, then who else stitches you when you finally stop pretending you're bulletproof?" Morgan almost argued, almost, but she saw it in Sarah's eyes, resolve forged by the clinic's shattered windows, by the children she had nearly lost to a bomb. Sarah wasn't a bystander anymore. So Morgan said nothing. They left Silverwood under cover of night, slipping into a world that no longer belonged to them. The town lay bruised behind them, boarded windows, burned storefronts, power lines sagging like broken limbs. Morgan didn't let herself look back. On the tarmac of a forgotten strip near the Canadian border, Henderson's contacts delivered. An old cargo plane, patched and tired, its fuselage rattling like a smoker's cough. But it flew. As they climbed aboard, Miller muttered, "Feels like boarding a coffin with wings." Morgan checked her rifle, steady hands betraying none of the storm inside. "Then let's make sure it lands before the lid closes." The engines roared. Montana snow fell away. And for the first time in years, Morgan left American soil not as a soldier, not as an operator, but as something nameless, an exile returning to the battlefield. The Black Sea greeted them with gray skis and a wind that tasted of rust. Odessa sprawled ahead, its cranes jutting against the horizon like broken teeth. Henderson's fixer met them on the dock, a man with eyes too sharp and a smile too quick. He handed over forged papers, a rusted van, and a warning. "Zakayv is not just a man here," he said. "He is weather, he is tide. You do not fight weather, you endure it or you drown." Morgan studied him, her voice flat. "Then we change the tide." The warehouse complex loomed like a scar at the edge of the sea. Fences topped with razor wire, floodlights sweeping, trucks moving in and out with mechanical precision. The kind of place that pretended to be industrial but smelled of war. Through binoculars, Morgan saw him, Zakayv, standing on a catwalk inspecting crates, issuing orders with a calm authority that chilled her. Volkov shadowed him, silent as ever, Dragunov slung across his back. Seeing them here, so close, so untouchable, stirred something raw inside her. Syria wasn't just memory anymore. It was present. It was here in flesh and steel and the scars beneath her sleeves. She lowered the binoculars. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "We finish it here." The infiltration began under moonless sky. Miller and Henderson cut the fence, slipping inside like ghosts. Sarah stayed back with the van, radio in hand, med kit ready. Morgan moved ahead, rifle steady, breath measured. Every step forward felt like a step backward in time. Damascus, Afghanistan, the valley where she had first lifted the javelin, the moments that had carved Phoenix out of Morgan Haye. She reached overwatch position, sights settling on Zakayv below. Her heartbeat hammered, her finger tightened. And froze. Not hesitation, not fear, something else. She saw the men moving crates, their faces young, weary, not soldiers, hires, pawns. She saw Sarah's face flash in her mind, the doctor who stitched wounds instead of making them. Killing Zakayv here meant fire raining down. Men, pawns, innocents, burned away in seconds. Her scope trembled. Down below, alarms blared. Henderson's diversion tripped too soon. A guard spotted Miller. Gunfire ripped the night. Chaos bloomed. Zakayv didn't flinch. He turned his head, calm as ever, eyes scanning the darkness like he was waiting for her. Then he smiled. He raised a hand and his men opened fire on everything. Crates splintered, sparks rained, trucks exploded into flame. Morgan's comm crackled with Miller's voice. "We're blown, move now." Her fingers squeezed, the shot cracked. The round struck the railing inches from Zakayv's head. He ducked, dragged by Volkov into cover. Again, always again. Morgan cursed under her breath, pulling back as floodlights swept her position. Bullets tore into stone around her. She ran. The team barely made it back to the van. Sarah's hands pulled Miller inside, blood soaking his sleeve. Henderson fired blind shots from the doorway as Morgan laid down cover fire. The van tore into the night, bullets sparking against its rusted hull, engine screaming. They escaped, but it wasn't victory. From the rear window, Morgan saw the warehouse engulfed in fire. Crates burning, smoke rising. And in that smoke, Zakayv calm, watching, unbroken. Back in a safe house, Miller's arm was stitched. Henderson cursed the failed diversion. Sarah trembled with adrenaline. Morgan sat in the corner, rifle across her knees, staring at nothing. Her mind replayed the moment, the scope, the trigger, the hesitation that wasn't hesitation. She could have killed him, she should have, but she hadn't. Why? The answer whispered inside her. Because she wasn't the same Phoenix who had burned through Syria. Because scars don't just mark flesh, they change it. Because something in her refused to let the world pay her vengeance's price. But in that mercy, she had condemned them all to fight again. She closed her eyes, fists clenched. She thought of Silverwood, of the children's paper snowflakes taped to school windows, of Sarah's steady hands, of Miller's quiet loyalty. And she whispered to herself, not as Phoenix but as Morgan. This ends, one way or another it ends. Outside, the Black Sea wind howled. Inside, silence stretched. Zakayv was still alive. And the final confrontation was coming. Why did she walk into the fire when every instinct begged her to stay in the shadows? The safe house reeked of sweat, blood, and fatigue. Miller's arm was bound but weak. Henderson's face was pale under the sickly light. Sarah's hands shook from stitching wounds that kept reopening. They had survived Odessa, but survival was no longer victory. Zakayv lived, Volkov lived, and every mile between here and Silverwood was nothing but borrowed time. Morgan sat in the corner, back against the wall, rifle across her knees. She hadn't slept, not really. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Zakayv's face through her scope, calm, waiting, daring her. She had pulled the trigger and still missed, not from aim, from choice. And that choice gnawed at her until her scars felt raw again. Henderson broke the silence. His voice was gravel, worn thin. Intercept confirms Zakayv's next move. Not another transfer, not sabotage. He slid a photo across the table. An airstrip in Crimea, remote, guarded, a private jet waiting on standby. "He's leaving," Henderson said. "Ties off loose ends here, then vanishes. If he makes that flight, we'll never find him again." Morgan's throat tightened. She knew what that meant. "This is it," Miller said quietly. No one disagreed. The plan was stripped to its bones. No more diversions, no more long games. They would hit the airstrip with everything left in them. Miller, Henderson, Sarah, and her. Olympus's last shadows against a man who had survived empires. They geared up in silence. Miller checked his magazines. Henderson adjusted the sat phone, his hand trembling just enough to betray his age. Sarah packed her kit again, despite Morgan's plea to stay. "I'm coming," Sarah said simply. Morgan looked at her, saw the fear under her resolve, the determination to stand anyway, and she couldn't argue. They reached the airstrip just before dawn. The horizon was bleeding pale light, the sky bruised with storm clouds. The tarmac stretched wide, dotted with hangars and armored vehicles. At the center the jet waited, engines quiet but ready. Through her scope Morgan saw him. Zakayv, standing near the stairs, coat snapping in the wind, Volkov at his side. Calm, collected, as if he had been expecting her. And maybe he had. They moved. Miller and Henderson flanked left, cutting down guards with precise bursts. Sarah stayed low, dragging her bag behind her, eyes scanning for the wounded. Morgan advanced from the ridge, her rifle cracking, each shot clearing a path. The storm broke. Gunfire tore the morning apart. Zakayv's men poured out of hangars, disciplined, methodical, but Olympus had teeth. Morgan dropped 3 before they knew where she was. Miller covered her flank, his voice hoarse through comms. Henderson coordinated angles with the clarity of a man who had lived his life inside battlefields. Sarah crawled to Miller when a round grazed his leg, stitching him on the concrete under fire. The jet roared to life. Zakayv was boarding. Morgan's breath froze in her chest. Not again, not this time. She ran. Bullets tore into the ground around her. She didn't stop. She felt the burn in her lungs, the old ache in her scars, the scream of her body asking her to give up. She didn't. She reached the base of the stairs. Volkov was there. The Dragunov roared, shattering the air. Morgan dove, the shot grazing her shoulder, blood hot against the cold morning. She rolled, came up with her rifle, and the world narrowed to her and him. Volkov's eyes were steel. His movements were mechanical, trained, predator versus predator. They circled, traded fire, metal screaming against metal. He was stronger. She was faster. He aimed to end. She aimed to survive. Then his shot came close, too close. It tore through her side, ripping breath from her lungs. Pain blazed. She staggered. Volkov advanced, calm, certain. But certainty kills. Morgan dropped her rifle, let him believe she was done. Then she pulled the knife from her vest and lunged. Steel met flesh. His eyes widened, shocked for the first and last time. He staggered back, the Dragunov slipping from his hands. He fell. Morgan's chest heaved, blood slick against her ribs. She turned. Zakayv stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at her. Calm, always calm. He raised his pistol. "Phoenix," he said, his voice carrying in the storm. "You should have died in Damascus. You were meant to be forgotten, and yet here you are, scarred, broken, pretending to be whole." Morgan's breath was ragged, but her voice was steady. "You're right. I am scarred, I am broken, but I'm not forgotten." She raised her pistol. For a heartbeat, silence. Then both fired. The world slowed. Morgan staggered, the bullet grazing her arm, searing hot. Zakayv reeled back, blood blooming across his chest. His eyes widened, shock breaking through that endless calm. He collapsed against the stairs, pistol clattering to the tarmac. For the first time he looked human, mortal. His lips moved, trying to form words. maybe vengeance, maybe disbelief. It didn't matter. He died before he could finish. The airstrip was chaos. Zakayv's men scattered, leaderless. Miller limped forward, Henderson at his side, Sarah sprinting to Morgan. She sank to her knees, the adrenaline draining, the pain roaring back in waves. Sarah's hands pressed against her side, shouting something she couldn't hear. Miller's voice barked orders in the distance. Henderson cursed it into calms. Morgan's world narrowed. She saw the sky, pale, endless, free. She thought of Silverwood, the diner lights, the paper snowflakes on school windows, the mitten in the snow. She thought of Olympus, of names crossed out in photographs, of men and women who had stood beside her in fire. She thought of scars. And she realized something. Scars weren't proof of weakness. They were proof of survival, proof that pain hadn't won. Her hand found Sarah's. Her voice, broken but clear, whispered one last truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't plead. It doesn't beg. It simply acts. By the time the sun rose, it was over. Zakayv was gone. Volkov was gone. Olympus was broken but breathing. Silverwood would live another day. And Morgan Haye, Phoenix, scarred, bloodied, unforgotten, remained. Not whole, never whole, but alive. And sometimes that was enough.